Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at a really weird bayonet. This is a Greek M4 bayonet. I apologise I don't have a Greek patch, so just have to do without for this video. Now, taking a brief look at it, you'll see it almost looks like the blade is made out of copper. There's a really weird reason for that, and I'll get into that later. Now, these bayonets were made for the US Military Assistance Program M1 carbines and M2 carbines supplied to Greece in the 1950s and early 1960s. The bayonets themselves were made by a company in Athens called, EMES, Greek word. And the Greeks received 146,863 M1 and M2 carbines as part of the military assistance program, and they received them between 1951 to 1963. Now, the US did not provide bayonets with the military assistance program, or occasionally they did, but very, very few. So we don't know how many of these bayonets were produced, but it's safe to say that they produced one for every carbine that did not come with the bayonet, so less than 146,000 likely. Jump to the history very quick. This was actually a pretty interesting read for me because I didn't know much about modern Greek history at all. But from 1944 to 1949, the Greeks had their civil war between the nationalists and their Communist Party. The nationalists were backed by the US and UK, and they were providing them with arms. Predominantly, that was the UK providing number 4 rifles, obviously with number 4 spike bayonets to go with them. Now, the nationalists won, and after they won, the new nationalist Greece became a member of NATO. And towards the end of the war, the US started providing aid as well. And after the war, when they became a NATO member, that's when they started receiving arms from the US under the military assistance program. Now, prior to that, the receiving of M1 Garands and M1 carbines and all of that from the US and the number 4s from the UK, they were using a whole range of different rifles. So I've seen they were using like Mannlicher M95 straight pulls, they were using French Bergiers, and I'm sure they were using some kind of Mauser and all other kinds of bits and pieces as well. So it's a lot of stuff in service. Now, while they were using the M1 carbine, they were also using the M1 Garand as their primary rifle. The M1 carbine is obviously like a secondary role kind of weapon. But both started to be replaced in 1973 when the Greeks started adopting the FN-FAL. So they purchased a couple from Belgium in 73, then they started producing them domestically. And the ones that they had were FALs fitted with the FAL Type C bayonet, which is the socket with the apple core blade on it. Later in the 1970s, they also started producing the G3 with their own locally made G3 bayonet, as well as a KCB 77 variation that fits to the G3. So two really cool bayonets, really hard to track down. I want them both. Now, the M1 carbines and these M4 bayonets weren't returned to the US until 2010 to 2011, and I'm not certain if that's when they were finally taken out of service or that's when they were just eventually handed back. I'm not sure exactly when the M1 carbine was no longer in service and this bayonet as well. But 2011 is when the US started surplusing these to the civilian market. That's the beautiful thing about the US. They supplied all of these arms under the military assistance program. And then when they came back, they started surplusing them to their public. And we have all these interesting variations of US arms provided to other countries with crests and locally made bayonets and slings and all kinds of cool things. Now, we'll jump into the construction, and that's where this bayonet becomes really, really interesting. So, I mentioned earlier it has the copper blade. The blade is actually made of steel, but it has a copper coating on it. It took me a long time to try and figure out why anyone would do that, because copper is an expensive material, a softer material than steel, so it's not going to hold an edge, it's going to be damaged. And I was thinking initially maybe that's corrosion resistance or something like that, but do Greeks really have, that much of an issue with corrosion? I know they've got a lot of maritime forces, a lot of islands and things like that, but no more than anyone else. And as soon as you put a finish on it, like we have here, we've got a black oxide finish, that's going to be enough corrosion protection anyway. Now, the copper surface isn't just to the blade, it's also to the latch plate. I'll see if I can get that visible. You can faintly see it on the edges there. Now, I started looking into black oxide finishes on copper because I was like, it's not something you see very often. You see black oxide on steel all the time, but not really on copper. I did a little bit of research. I'm not a expert in this field, but from what I turned up, back in the 1950s, black oxide on copper was the darkest and most light absorbent finish pretty much in existence at the time. It was so dark and had so much light absorbing properties that it was used on aerospace instruments and satellites to absorb light to get better readings on light detecting sensors and things like that. So when you put the black oxide finish on, you use a chemical called ebenol C, something that's not really commercially available anymore. I'm sure it is at places, but not like it used to be. And that would result in like a black velvety finish that would just absorb all the light. And from there, it appears they've actually polished it to make it a little bit reflective. So go figure. But we've got the same thing on the latch plate, but then the crossguard is just a regular blue. So I don't know what to tell you. So I'm assuming that this super dark ebenol C black oxide finish was applied to absorb light and make it less reflective and all kinds of things like that. Because over the years we've seen plenty of militaries innovate in little ways with bayonets and arms to make them, less lower profile, harder to see, things like that, harder to hear as well. Like the Ross bayonet with the Canadians had springs inside the muzzle ring and the mortise to stop rattling. So little things like that to make them harder to detect. So that's what's really interesting about this bayonet. But then we also have this absolutely terrible quality. The manufacturing is absolutely shocking. Like our line traveling down the blade here, I'll call it, I don't know, the spine or the ridge of the blade. It's not even, it's not a huge slant and it's got a curve in it. And then it doesn't even make it all the way to the point. Like that is absolutely shit. So quality in these, absolutely shocking. And then we have this really distinctive leather stacked handle that you only really see on the Greek M4s. So this is obviously a copy of the US M4 bayonet, so the difference being the copper, the finish, and the handle. The handle in the US one is pretty much straight with a slight bow in the middle. This is much more pronounced in the middle and then really tapers down either side. Initially I thought it looked a little bit silly, but holding it in my hand, that's actually really comfortable and I quite like it a lot. I've got big hands too, I'm 6'3", so it's a good fit for me. And that's really the construction of the bayonet. Other than that, it's just an M4. We've got a small muzzle ring, crossguard, full tang going down to a latch plate, which is pinned onto the latch plate, as you can see there, very crudely. We've got our 2 pins on our 2 claws, and they're ramped claws. They latch onto the bayonet lug, and that's it. The scabbard is just a US M8A1 scabbard, so I don't know if they purchased these from the US. I doubt they manufactured them locally. It looks like it's a PWH. I think that stands for Philadelphia Workers' House or something like that. I can't really remember. From memory, that was a workers' house for people with disabilities. Almost slave labour in the States, paying them virtually nothing, bored. I could be wrong. I probably am. But that's really the construction of the bayonet. And as soon as I started to learn a bit about this, I had to get one. I absolutely loved it. But the last thing to talk about is markings, and there really aren't very many, and that always makes me a little bit sad because I love my markings. But we have a manufacturer's mark just here, oops, upside down, on the, what's that, the left ricasso. And that's just an EME, poorly stamped. And that's the only mark on the entire bayonet. There might be another manufacturing mark or something like that underneath the stacked grips, but I'm not going to take them off and find out. Then, being a US scabbard, we just have the US M8A1 PWH marking on the front of this, and that'll obviously be different for other manufacturers as well. So really cool bayonet. I don't see them for sale terribly often, and there's not a terrible lot of interest in them, but I just think they're really neat and incredibly underrated. That's all I've got for made any mistakes, which I'm certain I probably have. Please feel free to comment below and correct us. If you have any sources or references or books or anything like that, just give us a recommendation, and we'll broaden our knowledge, I guess. Thanks for watching.